A drab and gray, pointless Monday that punches out summer as remorselessly as a time clock. That's Bill Kaufman describing Labor Day. But this ain't Labor Day. It's Memorial Day weekend. One of my favorite weekends of the year. I'm going to start the podcast out and talk a little bit about what Memorial Day means to me. And it really means nothing to me. And I know that's horrible. But I do try to remember the men who gave their lives to save this country, and some women. I know it's highly politically incorrect to say just men, but let's face it, that when it comes to war, they bore the entire brunt up until relatively recently. So I'm going to say the men, because Memorial Day was instituted back when it was still just men serving and giving their lives. Now, obviously, as a anti-war kind of guy, yeah, I really don't buy any war has been necessary since, say, the Revolutionary War, War of 1812. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty much. Yeah, I don't even buy into World War II, and that just astonishes my conservative listeners out there. I guess I'll go into it real quick, but the bottom line is, Hitler was really no direct threat to us whatsoever. And you could say, yeah, but he was enslaving people, and we had to free Western Europe. They were our allies, and that's legitimate. And again, I'm not even sure I'm really right about this whole thing about World War II, but this is just my general disposition. What bothers me is we stopped Hitler and we empowered the Soviet Union. Hitler killed 6 million. Stalin killed at least 20 million, probably close to 100 million. I think most people put it around 40 to 60 million is how many people he killed. You know, we saved the Far East from Japan, a terrible, terrible dictator regime. But then we subjugated it to Mao's China. Mao Zedong took over because of the vacuum we created in the Far East. And Mao Zedong was worse than anything the Japanese would have done, which is hard to believe because they were freaking awful, the Japanese. But Mao, I was telling my daughter, but I called him the three-headed dog from hell, a reference to Cerberus, from Greek mythology. I said Hitler, Stalin, Mao. And I said throughout my life, people talk about those three people, those three men as just being complete freaking monsters, and they seem to rotate who's the worst. When I grew up, it was always Hitler, then Stalin, then Mao. And then for a while, it was like Stalin, Hitler, Mao. I think current scholarship would say, no, Mao is the worst, then Stalin, then Hitler. So anyway, we stopped Hitler, and we stopped Japan, but then we're so tired of fighting, that we got Stalin and Mao. So what was the big victory? We took out two evil empires, or two evil regimes, and then ushered in two far worse regimes. So how was that a victory? Again, it can be argued. I'm not sure I'm right on that point, but what I don't like though is this unadulterated praise for what we did in World War II. And we kicked some ass, by the way. If you just want to be proud of just a nation mobilizing and showing the rest of the world what the frick we can do if we want to, World War II, that was a showcase. No doubt about it. I mean, when they saw how quickly we mobilized, how quickly we got over there, how quickly we started kicking ass, everyone realized, oh wow, there is a new man on the block, and that's the only man on the block. The Soviet Union was never even really a contender. Anyway. For me personally though, Memorial Day, I never served. Never had to, never got called up. I had to register for the draft. A lot of people were outraged. At the time, I wasn't outraged. I was 18 years old, and I figured, with that, I'll register for the draft. Kind of wish I'd served. I think it would have been a good experience, and I'll tell my kids later on. By the same token, I don't want any of my kids to serve. Not now. I mean, like I said, all these foreign wars, I'm just not really a fan of, to say the least. And to put my kids in the front line over there in Afghanistan. Not seeing it. Definitely a ton of respect for the people who do it. But so with the whole overall concept of how we're policing the world at this point. But personally, Memorial Day, for me, is the start of summer. And I know this sounds perverse, but I start the summer off by working. I usually start Friday night at 5:30. I come into the office with a bottle of vodka, some tonic water, and I start cleaning my office out. Try to get ready so I can actually enjoy my summer. That's kind of tricky. Sometimes I get so drunk I really can't work past like 7:45. So I gotta pack it in. But I try to pace myself, so I work like 9:30, 10 o'clock. And then on Saturday, I work in the garden, try to get the yard all put into shape, then just hang out the rest of the week and take it easy. It was all catalyzed for many, many years by a thing called Bird Camp. This was this weekend from hell. It was an outing of the Detroit Audubon Society that my wife's family has a long tradition of going to. And what it involves is you drive to northern Michigan, Lower Peninsula, Lower Michigan, which is the drive from hell. It's like every person from Detroit on the east side and Chicago on the west side are going to northern Michigan because it's absolutely freaking beautiful, especially in late May, early June. So you fight traffic all the way up there, and then you get into this place called Mango Tassi or something like that. It's outside Tawas City. And they jam, not jam, but they put 20 people in one building with one great big common room with a piano that the kids bang on the whole time. It's it's a constantly people in your face. Not bad way, by the way. Not like, yelling. It's all Marie's family and they're great people. But I'm the type of guy who needs like a lot of my own space. I need to carve out just my own space and be by myself for large sections of the day. And that's not possible for 3 frickin' straight days. And then on top of that, you bird watch all the time. And my eyes aren't real good. I've never been a very observant person. I remember the first time I went, I was still dating Marie, so I'm trying to make a good impression. And bird watchers are nice people, and so they want to make sure you're having a good time. So I'm walking through the woods, and I'm getting eaten by mosquitoes. I'm just freaking miserable. It's getting hot and humid out. And they're like, "Oh, hear a bird?" And everyone stops, looks for this bird, and they start looking, and you gotta whisper. And there it gets up there, and they're like, 10 o'clock, and I'm looking, and I can't see a damn thing, And so, and this one, I don't know. I remember one particular stop to look for a bird. I'm like 60 seconds into it, and I'm just like, "Oh, yeah, there it is. That's really pretty." And I couldn't see anything. The person, not from Marie's family, some stranger bird watching, she goes, "Oh, you're looking the wrong spot." She could tell I was lying to her. "Oh, yeah, that's a pretty bird." So that was just miserable. I tried it 2 more times as well, and I said the whole thing. I mean, I described it as a genital kicking contest. I mean, it's like, "Hey, Shusky, you want to come to this genital kicking contest, participate?" It's like, frick no. That's kind of what it is for Memorial Day with me. And I always miss my family. I wish I just stayed home. But they took off, and I was like, "Hey, you make the best of it," and that's a lot of work. A lot of studying. I'd always get like a lot of recreational reading and writing done. And then a lot of drinking too. But those days are over. Bird Camp folded up. It's done, kaput after like 50 years. It's kind of sad, I guess. I couldn't care less. I mean, it was like, "Oh, Eric, the genital kicking contest is going to go on this year." It's like, oh, damn, fine tradition we lost there. But now the family's home, so now Memorial Day weekend, for what it means to me, at age 53, I have to completely remake it. I don't know what Memorial Day will mean to me at this point. Okay, I'm going to do some lightning segments here. Now you're not going to hear the gin and tonic glass tingling in the background. I got this, like, the other side of that going. It's early in the morning, and I'm pretty hungover. My daughter Meg, senior in high school, she brought home the Senior Athlete of the Year award, which is our local high school's way of honoring the best athlete in the class. There's one for girls, one for boys. Meg won it. I'm really proud of her. And Came back home with some friends and family and had quite a few drinks to celebrate. Meg even stuck around for a little bit. She didn't have any drinks, but she stuck around. But after she left, we continued to celebrate, so paying the price this morning. I think I'm going to bring back the word dealio. This is this greasy, smarmy word that almost got off the ground in the 1980s. It was like when you went to a car audio place and the salesman would pitch a car audio system to you and you'd ask the price and he'd say, okay, so here's the dealio. Gonna bring that word back. Speaking of kids, as I mentioned in last week's podcast, Alex and Jack have been in Mexico now for a month in immersion school. And they are learning a lot of things about Mexican culture, and they're speaking a lot of Spanish, doing a lot of Spanish things, doing a lot of Mexican things. They said they went on some romp. I'm not sure what happened. We always said, "Be careful when you're down there. Be careful." It's a, to quote our esteemed president, it's a shithole down there, or a shithole, as I like to call it. But in my town, we have a lot of Mexicans, and they hooked them up with some of their relatives down in Oaxaca, or a neighboring town of Oaxaca. And again, Oaxaca's way down south of Mexico. I mean, I believe I mentioned last week, it can't be more than a couple hours from Guatemala. Anyway, so one of these cousins came down to Oaxaca and took him out on the town, and she brought like her homosexual friend with her or something. Pretty colorful guy. Said he was funny guy, fun to hang out with. They hit these different bars. And I think they had way too much to drink. They ended up, he said, like in some sort of neighborhood. They said it was just like they're in a car. They're all jammed in this car. But Alex and Jack, who are about as white as you get, in the car, these Mexican friends they'd made. They had dropped some guy off. Right? They don't know what happened, but there was some neighborhood. This is like apocalyptic looking. They said these great big like Rottweilers roaming all over the streets. And the cousin's like, hey, you stay in the car. Stay in the car. We'll take care of this. Whatever. And there's like, yeah. And at one point they thought, well, maybe they sat in the car for something like 20 minutes. Like maybe we should just get out and walk home. Like, looking at all these dogs walking around. Like, nah, we're gonna stay right here. They've gotten to be pretty tight with their house mom. She's a woman that puts them up for the month. And they really like her. She's really become quite fond of Alice and Jack. And they told her the next morning where they went. And she wasn't amused. She's just like, don't you ever go to that neighborhood ever again. It's just, that's like idiots. But on the bright side, on the drinking in Mexico, they've gotten to be much more acquainted with mezcal. Mezcal? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. It's an agave distillate. It's made from the agave plant, so it's a lot like tequila. And it's really gotten really popular. And it's pretty funny. They get there, a couple weeks ago, and they go into one of these mezcal bars, and they're talking with the owner, and they start realizing he has some books on the shelves. And this owner's name is Ulysses. It's not spelled like Ulysses S. Grant or the character from Greek mythology, but Ulysses, U-L-I-S-E-S, and it's Ulysses Torrentera. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they see he wrote a couple books about mezcal, and they talk to him. They say he's really funny, a really engaging guy, down to earth, politically incorrect humor. Jack told one of the jokes that he told him. He said the next day in his Spanish class, and the more politically correct among them were not amused, to say the least. He's like, hey, Ulysses told it to me. And he's like the man. Because it turns out Ulysses is the man. He's the mezcal man. So Jack sent me a link, and yeah, sure enough, LA Times had a story on him that, mezcal has, the whole gist of the story is that mezcal has undergone this boom in the United States. You have mezcal bars all over the place. You can't know mezcal unless you know Oaxaca. And you can't know mezcal in Oaxaca unless you know Ulysses. They say basically, yeah, he's a guy who put mezcal on the map. It used to be like a drink of the rural Mexican poor. And he made it now like a very fashionable drink. I guess there's like 40 different varieties, something like that. And half tempted to try it, but man, I cannot do tequila. And, being both made from agave, I gotta believe they're really, really similar. Oh, why can't I do tequila? Oh, I had a youthful indiscretion in Guadalajara. And that sounds so cool. Yeah, I tied one on in Guadalajara, and I got this tattoo on the leave. Well, I didn't get a tattoo, but 17 years old, high school Spanish trip down to Guadalajara. This is like 1983. And I went on a date with some girl I met down there, headed off with her, and I was on this, 17-year-old high after meeting this girl and making out with her. And so my buddy and I went down. I'd had a couple drinks before the date, and then so my buddy and I went down to this bar. We did I don't know how many shots of tequila, and the bartender was kind of laughing because we were kind of wobbly. Went back to our room, and we're really, really drunk at this point. And so let's go get some more. So I walk back into the bar. I'm all loaded, and I'm real loud. I go, "Diez más!" and throw this, 100 pesos on the bar. And the bartender, I still remember it. He goes, "Diez?" His eyes are really wide. And my friend's like, yeah, cinco. Cinco. And the bartender took a couple of shots with us. And yeah, it was pretty much lights out after that. I couldn't quite get back to our room straight. I know one of our roommates was really cool. He liked to drink, but he was hungover from drinking the day before. He had to help us back into the room, and we were a mess. And the Spanish teacher was not amused. I remember the big climax of the trip was going to Puerto Vallarta, you're right on the beach. Yeah, the rest of the trip was like Mexico City, and you're seeing all these Mexican cultural things, and a lot of walking, a lot of sightseeing, which was really cool. But high schoolers, enough's enough. But but at the end, 2 days in Puerto Vallarta on the beach, checking out chicks. And she goes, if you don't get down for breakfast, like in 5 minutes, you're on the next plane home. And she freaking meant it too. And I go down to breakfast, and I am just green. And those are the good old days. Spanish teacher, she got over being angry. And again, she was justifiably angry. She got over it. And she didn't turn me in. This is a school-sanctioned trip. And me and my buddy got no school sanctions. She told both our parents. And she goes, I'm not going to turn into school, but I'm going to tell your parents. And, whatever it is, I can't let you drink like that and not tell your parents. But then, when she talked to my parents, she said, do what you want. She goes, I'll tell you, I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone that hungover before. I think he paid his price, tenfold for what he did. She's but your call to your son got stinking drunk in Guadalajara. And yeah, my parents didn't punish me. And again, they didn't need to. Here I am. It is literally, 35 years later, and I can barely smell tequila without my stomach quivering. Hey, I started this podcast talking about only men serve in war and always have. Yeah, that's not true. What I meant to say is men bear the brunt in losing their lives. Until recently, men were the only ones who lost their lives in war. That's what I meant to say. When a nation goes to war, especially a big war, like World War II, everyone pays the price, including the women, helping out in the factories, rationing, whatever. So, yeah, that was a grossly inaccurate statement. Men bore the brunt in losing their lives, not bore the brunt of war by themselves. That's not true. And that quote, by the way, that I started with was Bill Kaufman. Bill Kaufman is one of my favorite writers. He's a guy I'd like to meet, and I'm sure he would. He lives in Batavia, New York. If I made it out there, he'd be like, yeah, by all means, let's get together and have a beer. He's probably the most stylistic writer I know anymore. He is he's like a localist. He just preaches the need to keep your interests local. His most famous, not his most famous saying, the saying I really like is, I don't want anyone making rules for me that doesn't know me. That's how much he's against big government. And he wrote this splendid book called Look Homeward, America. I'm reading back through it the second time. And it is just a series of many essays about diverse characters throughout American history, who were basically just nonconformists. And I'm not talking like the nonconformists in Humboldt County, California growing weed, although he'd probably have a soft spot for them too. I'm talking about, people like Grant Wood, that dude who painted American Gothic, the guy with the pitchfork and his wife. Mother Jones, Eugene Debs, Dorothy Day. It's just a series of biographies about these people, and it's just, like I said, one of the most engaging books I've ever read, and I can't recommend it enough. An extremely easy read with one exception. Kaufman has a shockingly broad vocabulary. You'd even think it was pretentious, but sometimes I read a word, I don't know what it means. I can tell from this sentence kind of what it means, and I'm just like, BS, Kaufman. You're just using that word to make yourself look smart. So I'll look it up in the dictionary, and sure enough, that word that he used was far more concise, or precise, I should say, than the word I was thinking it meant. And then basically, if you pull those two words up in a very good thesaurus, they'd probably pull up as synonyms. But they're not really. This word is that much more precise in the context he's using it. Again, really impressive. I've probably 3, 4, or 5 times I've pulled the word up in a dictionary thinking, no way, you're just being pretentious. You don't need to use that word here. This other word would have substituted just fine. And sure enough, I was like, nope, the word he used is actually more accurate given the context, or given the sentence and the point he's trying to make. Again, truly impressive guy, and the absolutely stunning vocabulary is really entertaining. So check out that book. Alright, here's an argument or a theory so novel I'm not even sure I believe it myself. So here it goes. The Catholic Church's corruption is itself a sign that it's a divine institution. I think, look at the last 2,000 years, you can look at 3 time periods when the Catholic Church went through intense periods of corruption. The 8 and more particularly 900s, or 9th and 10th centuries, we'll say from 850 to 1000. The next era would be at the Renaissance popes, going up to the eve of the Reformation, so we'll say 1300s, 1400s. And then today's Catholic Church, with all its sex abuse scandal stuff going on, and what is obvious cover-up, going to the highest levels, possibly to Pope Francis himself. And I think some people I respect would say, not quite possibly, definitely including Pope Francis himself is covering this stuff up. I'm not there yet, although I have some grave concerns. So here's what I find significant about those 3 forms of corruption. All 3 took the form of the culture they're living in. So let's look at the 900s. What was the most telling historical feature of the 900s? Well, it was the Viking raids that had, as one pundit put it, removed the curse of gold and silver from Europe. The Vikings had come into Europe, massive raids, and took all the good-looking chicks, all the gold and all the silver, took it back to Scandinavia with them. That left Europe with a barter economy, an agriculture economy, where land became all. Land was the form of wealth, because they had no real portable wealth. And if you look at the form of corruption in the Catholic Church, especially in the 900s, it revolved around bishops trying to acquire more land for themselves, and in particular their family, their brothers and sisters, their children. Another issue that they had children. But it was all this land grasping, the corruption, multiple bishoprics. The corruption all took the form of bishops trying to acquire more land, because land in Europe was everything. Shift forward to the Renaissance. You're in the era of Machiavelli, Machiavellian type politics, intrigue, warfare. Well, that's the Renaissance popes. And they're involved in intrigue at either the personal level or at the royal level. They're involved in warfare, Pope Julian actually leading forces out into the field. That was the corruption. It almost perfectly mirrored the culture around it. And then come the 20th century, what do you got? Well, you got ass railing. Well, shocker, shocker, we've had a huge homosexual revolution that's been going on for about 100 years. It's part of the sexual revolution just in general, but once Freud ripped the lid off sexuality, pretty much every form of perversion or sex practice, whatever you want to call it, every sort of sexual freedom or license came out. And now that's the form that the church is taking in its form of corruption today. So why do I say, this is all sign of it's a divine institution? Well, first off, you have the obvious thing that, G.K. Chesterton and other people have pointed out. The church must be divine or it couldn't have survived all the scandal. Someone once said, Catholics themselves have done everything they can to drag down and to kill the Catholic Church. But they haven't been able to succeed. So that itself, it's a pretty fundamental argument and one I've heard many times, and I think there's a lot of merit to it. The fact that the church continues to exist 2,000 freaking years later after everything we as Catholics have done to destroy it, and it still persists, that's a hell of a testament. But here's the thing I'm looking at. The fact that the corruption within the church takes the form of the culture around it tells me the church itself must be different than the culture around it. Or else the corruption it takes in would have an impact on the form. Again, that's a little bit tricky. And put another way, the fact that the church could take on so many different forms of corruption is because it is not the corruption itself. It is different than the corruption. It is different than the earthly things that make the corruption. The church is different. That's why when that form of corruption then is eliminated, either in society at large, landowning and grasping was not a big thing come the Renaissance as wealth started growing and, trade increased and gold and silver came back in. And then especially once, we started expanding to Europe. Western Europe started expanding to other parts of the world and started taking their gold and silver and bringing it back to Europe. They got the church still persist. That form of corruption was no longer there. So the corruption itself is an earthly thing, or a worldly thing is probably a better way to put it, more in line with the teachings of St. Paul. It's a worldly thing, and it has an impact on the church because the church is also a worldly thing, but it's also a divine institution. It's kind of sacramental that way. But yet the corruption doesn't leave its mark on the church. The corruption passes away, but the church persists, and it's not impacted by the corruption because the church has something in it that's not worldly. That is the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So I hope that's making sense. As I think a pretty good analogy, look at a crock pot. And you have a crock pot that's been there for 2,000 years. And at times you look at the crock pot and it just has all sorts of great food in it. You want to eat it. It's just beautiful. And then sometimes you look in there, it's like a stinking batch of worms and crap. But then when you mix out the crock pot, you put something else in, the crock pot stays. No matter how vile the crap you put in the crock pot, even if it's burnt down to the sides, you gotta scrub it real hard with one of those Brillo pads. The crock pot itself stands. The crock pot stays. Because it's not the stuff that's going into it. The mere fact that the crock pot can hold corruption and hold good food is a sign that the crock pot itself is not the food itself. The crock pot can hold the entire world because the crock pot itself is not the world. If you want a contrary example, look at the United States today. It is not a divine institution. Despite the protestations of the Manifest Destiny people of the 19th century, it's not a divine institution. As evidenced by the fact that our Constitution is constantly changing to take forms that the founders never ever imagined, like the Obergefell decision about gay marriage. The corruption of homosexuality is now the corruption of the U.S. Constitution, per the Supreme Court. And you can argue it's a good or bad thing. I'm not here to argue that. I think listeners know I have my opinion. But you can't argue the fact that the corruption in the culture, or a change in the culture, has now had an impact on the most fundamental institutions of the United States. The Constitution, the Supreme Court, the court system itself, that is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to sit outside of the political milieu, but clearly it does not. Clearly the political changes in our culture have had an impact on our fundamental political institution. The corruption that the Catholic Church was stained by, the crap that went in the crock pot, did not leave a mark on the church. You're not going to see any of the corruption from the 900s in the church today. The crock pot stands unstained. Okay, that's a wrap for the week. Go check out the Facebook page, subscribe to the Twitter feed, tell your friends and family. Go to UDemon Podcast for show notes and other information. As always, thanks for listening.